Hi there, welcome to the second episode of the innovation series from Attitude Makeover. As you can see, this journey has been an ongoing process, and my intent is to cover various nuances of one's journey as a mid career professional. And innovation is the need of the hour, whether you are a leader in the organization, an individual contributor. It doesn't matter in what space in the organization you're working, innovation seems to be the new mantra to survive. And hence, we're pondering through the second chapter of innovation, understanding creativity. I have with me a wonderful guest, Philippe Gluckman, an ex DreamWorks professional, a VFX expert, who's going to walk us through the journey of a creator. We start off with really understanding the creative individuality. What does that really mean? How does one grow in the creative thinking space? Are there things that, as an individual, irrespective of where you are, can you sort of grow in that space of creative thinking? How do you diversify your mind to have more experiences and thereby, you know, interlocked individuality? What I mean by that is, my experience working in India versus my experience working in the US basically brings two adjacent spheres of influence together and diversifies my understanding of a particular subject or how it impacts various different customer bases. So, can I diversify my mind? How do I go about doing that? We then zoom into an organization point of view to really see. So far, we've been talking about an individual. When it comes to an organization, is there a mantra or a philosophy that can be applied to nurture creativity as a culture? And also go deeper into understanding what is the leadership role in creativity? How do you build creativity within an organization, and thereby ponder through a very important question of, can creativity be built at scale? This and a lot more is what we cover in this beautiful conversation. I must tell you, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with Felipe. And I hope you love this, enjoy this, and can draw a lot of laterals to your world wherever you are, whether you're in healthcare, education, technology, it doesn't matter. I think if you can draw a lateral perspective of how this applies to your journey, I think my job is done here. Thank you again for tuning into another episode of Attitude Makeover. Like always, as a creator, I urge you to like, subscribe, and share if you found this useful. See you again next week, and thank you. So, Philip, a very good afternoon, and thank you so much for being part of Attitude Makeover. It's my privilege to really have you. I've heard so many lovely things from many folks who worked in DreamWorks, including my sister, and I really think I'm very honored to have you here. So, thank you.
Well, same. I mean, I'm very honored to be here. Actually, wonderful that you thought of me and brought me into this. So yeah, excited to talk.
I think we've picked a very interesting topic today on how do you preserve your creativity through your career journey, and also should you really
hmm
look at it consciously. But I always start my conversation with my guests trying to find out a little more on a personal front, who is my guest, what's my guest all about. uh, but before I start, I'll tell you where I'm coming into this conversation, what mindset I'm coming from. I've always been an engineer first and anything else afterwards. And so I feel it's a very creative space because a lot of disruption and the agility in which the disruption takes over the world is like out there for everybody to see. So it's an extremely creative space. And yet, if you actually talk to many engineers, we don't say that we're creative. We say we're engineers. I feel that for a long time in my career profession, I always said I'm not creative. And then I realized when I consciously started looking at myself and my journey, there's a lot of creativity, but it manifests itself not in the art form that it's mostly known outside, but in the science and the ability to change things or create new things or really look at it from a different perspective. So I find this conversation today not just meaningful for me, but my entire community of engineers who are out there who are working professionals. And I feel it's the need of the hour because there's so much transforming out there that you really need to, knock on your creative self and really wake that portion or that side of you.
Mhm.
And so this is a brilliant conversation. And who better than to have you actually lead that conversation there? So my first question is, who are you from an individual perspective? Because when I normally ask people introduce themselves as I'm so and so associated with so and so organization with this so and so title. But if I strip you of that, who is Philip and what's your journey like?
Yeah, well, oh God, I hope I don't start talking for 8 hours. I'm sure you'll interrupt me. Um, in in regards to the creativity, well, so first of all, my name is Philippe Gluckman, and I am from France. Although I've lived large portions of my life outside of France. I guess maybe in regards to the topic of the day, um, I'll say something that's going to sound horribly pretentious, but I'll qualify it quickly. But I think, very quickly, I realized and knew I was an artist. And again, that sounds horribly pretentious, but what I mean by that is, from the very beginning, I just sort of needed to create things. And I'm saying that with no qualification on the quality of this thing. It could have been crap, but in a way, that's not what I'm talking about. The fact for me was that is what I wanted to do, and in my teen years or early adult, it would manifest itself in many different ways: drawing, music, this and that. I mean, all those things. And to me, they were visceral. And at the time, I didn't even think about it. I thought, oh yeah, that's what everybody does, and that's what they all want to do. They just want to create stuff, just like me.
Mm.
Um, and eventually, and of course, my parents and I come from a family of doctors, physicians in France. So to them, that was like, really, okay. They probably more thought about science or, like, but I was very fortunate that, I mostly by seeing friends, I realized, well, you could actually study this and potentially that could become work. But it took me a while to get to that realization. And thankfully they supported me. I will say though, to this day, I wonder whether that was from a pure creative point of view the right choice. Like to me, creativity, like the big creativity, is still something that you do in isolation. I'm a very solitary person, by the way, and you do that completely outside of influences, and you do it by yourself because then you don't have to worry about convincing anybody else about the validity. You just do, like, like, I don't know, Beethoven writing sonatas. I mean, he didn't ask anyone what they thought, or he just sit down and um, I. So to me, that's still what creativity should have been. But as you
Yeah.
get drawn into um, studying and then later working, well, things change, and that becomes very overwhelming. Like it takes you in, and of course, a lot of things happen on the way. Some things are wonderful, and some things, I mean, I probably everybody regrets something from their childhood, so I guess I would be no exception. But yeah, so that's a little bit who I am. I think I'm someone who at times has invested a lot of work, but I've also invested a lot outside of work, and that's always been true. My passions may have changed, but there was always something, and for some reason. It's always very consuming. Like I have to do this, come hell or high water. This is what I want to do, and I just do it, and regardless of consequences sometimes. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your
There's
question, but
so
that's what came out of my mouth.
No, no. It did answer my question. And there's so many um, interleaving thoughts that I want to ask you about. The first one being, I can relate with one part of it that you talked about, which is I've always been doing something else, right? I've always been doing something else. When I'm working in a company, like I said, I don't think for a long time, I didn't think I was very creative. So I always wanted to learn. So the bigger intent of my journey was I wanted to learn. I was curious as to how it's done and I want to learn it. And I'm been a more hands on experiential learner. So I take the plunge more easily to learn. And because it is in solitude, you go through this learning process. There's no one to judge you, and you take a break in between. It's okay.
Mm,
So it's like that slow motion multitasking really worked for me. So I can relate with that. But where I invested in it in this creative process is like, for example, what does it take to run a company? What does it take to run a boutique firm, a creative boutique firm, or scale it? And I was more curious from that perspective. Like I said, I'm not an artsy person at all, but I kept getting attracted to art in the process. Like I had a good liking for illustrations. I had a good liking for music and good photography, cinematography. I kept getting better and better at that. And as I started setting up more companies in these hustles, I got better and better in expressing what I'm doing as well, to your point. So I can totally relate
mhm.
with that. And that's why I want to go deeper into the conversation of, this whole creative individuality. We're all seeking identity in the end. So thereby this creative individuality becomes very important in a creative process. Or am I just like, smoking up something and speaking over here?
No, I think so, and I suppose at some point we're going to talk about work, but what's interesting on in the workplace, and so we are in a creative field, and you have all these people who uh, presumably have these aspirations, or otherwise they wouldn't be there. But at the same time, uh, animation filmmaking. I don't know how much people realize how long it takes and how many people it requires. And it's a little bit like a conductor in an orchestra. You've got all these musicians, but they have to play together, and you have to get all of them to a very specific result usually. And what's, I guess, interesting is you have all these people who might have completely different creative, like inside of them, worlds that are very different, aspirations that are different. Uh, but you leave part of that at home, and now
Yeah.
you're working for someone else's vision, and a lot of it is is to really understand what that vision is, and contribute in your way to it, and always plus it, hopefully. So yeah, it's a bit of a transformation from your own artistic aspirations to now you are part of a bigger whole, and hopefully that's satisfying too. By the way, in fact, it's like I don't know, like you're building a building with a bunch of people, so it's not you doing your thing, but now you're part of something bigger. But it is an evolution that that people have to have it. To me, and I don't know if I'm digressing already, but in a way, it poses a question of education a bit, in terms of how do you teach art. Like when I started, there was no such thing. Animation,
Mm.
especially computer animation, actually didn't exist at all. And so most people who ended up in that field were self-taught, or they came from neighboring disciplines, but there was no such things. Now there's animation schools left and right.
Yeah.
Um, but what should they teach? You know,
Mm.
uh, our business, of course, is at the confluence of technology and art. Like, there's not one that's more important than the other, and you'll find people who are more to one side or more to the other side. You have people who can do all of it. But in terms of, how do we how do we prepare people to work on these films? It's an interesting debate, because the easiest thing would be to say, well, we're just going to teach them the software, um, which is of course useful. But other schools or other people have thought more. Well, we'll ask them to be artists, and then the software will sort of come naturally with it.
Yeah.
Um, and probably it's somewhere in the middle that it needs to be. So yeah.
Uh, Before we go into the journey of a creative person, um, I want to go deeper into the art of filmmaking and your journey there. I remember watching, what was that? The How to Train a Dragon. Was that completely? I was there in the premiere release when you guys had that at Urushi,
Oh,
and
okay, all
as in
right, yeah.
awe of a couple of things. Of course, the animation, and us surrounded by all employees who've been part of this, and families coming and watching it. I thought it was like a really wonderful experience in itself. But then, I've always been this movie goer who, as soon as the movie ends, unless the cinematography was great, then I would wait to either see who was the cinematographer or go back immediately in Google and start following them. Or it was the first time when I watched this with the whole team that I saw everybody is staying there to look at the
Yeah, they
last,
want to see their name, yeah. Yeah,
yeah, the credits, right? And I thought that
that's
was
so
really,
funny.
I mean, I remember my sister's name was like coming way in the end. I was
Oh,
like,
I
where
know,
is
yeah.
it? Where is it?
How
So I
often
thought
have
that
I
was
sat
really
in a
cool.
theater and, everybody's gone and they're starting to clean around me. I'm like, I want to see my name. But, you know, yeah,
It
nobody.
comes down to the identity, isn't it, Philip? It really comes down to we as humans really crave for that identity, which is why we describe ourselves as working for so and so in this sort of role. But when you think of a creator, it's a little beyond a title as an identity. What does an identity mean to you?
I think people who come to this industry, they always say, you're here because you're passionate, and a lot of people. I mean, I'm much older than most, but a lot of people have grown uh, seeing some of the earlier CG movies, and that became a huge aspiration, and that is um, what they identify with, and the desire to be able to be part of that um, is tremendous. I think everybody will remember, and I count myself in that, of having the desire to have a significant role to play on a film. From the process of it, to the inception of it, to the conception, to the execution of it, to the day where you describe, where you're actually sitting in the theater and say, oh shit, this is me, oh my god, I can't believe this would ever happen to me. uh you know so I think you'll find a lot of people who will put a lot of their passion solely into this. It's very aspirational, even though by now there's been 100 of these movies, but yeah, still.
Has there been a particular work of yours that really is more closer to you? Like, I did that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I wonder if this is true for everybody, but you'll probably most remember your first experiences. And I was really, really fortunate. It's one of those where I think I ended up in the right place at the right moment. So I'll tell you briefly. I don't know if it's interesting, but I'll say it anyway. I started my career in actually 2D animation, so still drawing, and this was in France. And it was the worst possible time to do that. These were the years where animation was nowhere. Even Disney was struggling, and it was pathetic. Like everybody, it was actually odd now I think of it in retrospect. But you had all these people who looked back to what they call the golden age of Disney, which was in the 40s, 50s, etc. And in their mind, it was like a paradise lost that would never come back. I mean, how could it be more depressing? Like this thing, and they
Yeah.
would collect cells from the Disneys, and they would and and it was done. I was very, very lucky though that I got to collaborate with a a company in France that did computer graphics animation, and I was on the 2D side, and they were doing computer graphics. And eventually, seeing what sorry state this whole was, I switched, and a few years later, that's where I went to the U.S. and worked for one of the leading companies in the field. I'm fast forwarding a little bit, otherwise it's going to get boring. But soon thereafter, after I joined in at PDI was the name of the company, DreamWorks came in, and we entered production. They were actually looking for a studio to do their first computer graphics animated film, and they entered a relationship with us, and that's where I say, oh God, I was just in the right place because I got to work. So it was Antz. Antz is not a
Mhm.
very famous film, um, but it is the second film after Toy Story to come out in terms of computer animated movies. It also had a vibe that you probably don't see that much. It starred Woody Allen, for example, which is a rather unusual casting choice
Yeah.
for you know. Uh, and what's interesting to me is the group that we had at PDI was just amazing, and we all look back to it with tears in our eyes. We had no clue what we were doing, and that's probably why we were so good, because we were fearless in a way. I mean, you know, and we figured it out. And I think that experience really resonates. Um, Beyond that, I should mention the next film that went into production was Shrek. Now, of course, when we worked on Shrek, we had no clue. We actually it was actually a relatively painful film in some aspects, mostly because it was very chaotic. It had a long history of first it was tried this way, then it was tried that way. It couldn't really find its tone, and very often when you're on the movie, you do not see the big picture. And it's kind of funny actually. Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was the CEO, kept telling us, "You'll see, this is going to be as big as Star Wars," and we were like, "Yeah, right." And he was right. I mean, when Shrek came out, it took the world by storm. In fact, I hear there's rave parties around Shrek even now, 20 or more years later. But Shrek was also a big breakthrough because those first few films, everything was new. We didn't know how to do anything. Shrek in particular, it's essentially one of the first times that we did humans in a relatively realistic way, not fully realistic, but so we had to do with skin, we had to do with hair, clothing, all that nobody had done. And so there was a lot of hard work, but also a lot of reward in being part of those first steps that we took. Since we're talking about how you keep your creativity alive and stuff, uh, there is a point where the industry started to plateau a little bit. And as
Mhm.
more and more movies came up, and as the technologies became more and more refined, innovation became a little less, of course, because a lot of the problems were solved. What I do find interesting is, so the curve then was like this steep. Maybe it was vertical. I don't know. I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, everything you turn to. By the way, you talk about technology. We were working with technology directly. Like we literally sat with engineers. You turn around and, hey man, I can't do this. Oh, I'll do it. I'll compile it for you. You can try. Tell me if it works. This today is
Yeah.
impossible. No, nobody can do this because the studios are much bigger and stuff. But it was that kind of very fast iteration of innovation, both technical and creative. Um, so yeah, the point I was trying to make is at some point it plateaued a little bit. I do think now we're in a sort of a second
Wave
slope
of it.
of
Yeah.
just because the technology has evolved in a way where, with all the real time rendering and all those things, which essentially means that the processes that before took so long and took so many people have gotten so fast that they start to
Merge.
compress and possibly require few people. And the adoption of those new workflows that this enable, it sort of kick everybody back in. Oh, okay, now well we're back to okay, we really don't know how to do this anymore. Let's reinvent it. Which is both disruptive. I know everybody likes to say disruption all over the place, but yeah, it is disruptive. Um, um, and it's the same thrill. Like for people coming now into the industry, it feels like it's wide open again. You
Yeah.
could come and completely revolutionize. I don't know how to say that word. Disrupt the way these movies are made. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can relate with this because I think I was telling you this the other day. I worked on these printers, and the first printer that we worked on, we were going to try out something which was going to be a massive competition for USB. It's a protocol called 1394. And we had to work very closely with the chipset guys, with the folks who are laying down the guidelines or boundaries of how this protocol would work. And there we were as an engineering team trying to print out large format design printouts, and the thrill of working with across industries, and to really create something which could be maybe a big flop as well, like 1394 didn't really kick off.
Mhm.
It still sticks around because wow, I've gone through that, and that learning I don't think anybody can take away from you, isn't
Yeah,
it?
correct, correct, yeah. And it's funny,
So
a little earlier when you asked me, who am I, where do I come from, and all that, and I described this very solitary artist, with all these hair, which I don't have anymore, doing his thing. But the rewards, though, of working in a team, just for that reason you said, are tremendous because you not only meet different people, and I think little by little too, you switch to that becomes almost more your passion, like who you're working with, and
yeah,
how you look at their journey and you're like, oh my god, this guy is now doing this. I mean, you get very emotionally involved with all this, but also in this discipline you work with all kinds of people. So you have people that are very on the artistic side, but you also have people who are very, very, very on the technical side, and somehow there's this synergy if it's all working well,
yeah.
which is super enriching to all.
So if I were to step back, ask you to step back and look at it and say, for one to call themselves creative, are there some basic things that you need to start looking at yourself, internalizing, to say, okay, I'm going to plunge into this creative journey? What are some of those things that one would have to start looking inwards?
Do you mean for someone who's starting a career, or just curious about themselves,
Yeah,
I suppose?
yeah.
Actually, in a way, I don't know because to me, it was never a question in a way. But I think to me in creativity, so there's probably various things. I think artistic creativity probably is largely about you have experiences, you have things either in the world around you or in yourself that for some reason you feel you need to express, and you feel that you have a point of view on them that you must put that out there. And again, I'm not saying whether this is whatever you put out there is good or bad. It's just the fact that impulse is very strong in you, and it can come out in any way. So that's one thing. In a way, it's I experience things and I have a point of view, and I really feel that I need to share this because it's important. Others
Yeah.
may judge whether it's important or not. But beyond that, I'm making this up as I speak, but I think creativity is also a little bit of, on one hand, you want to understand the rules of whatever you're supposed to do, especially in the professional context. But at the same time, uh, I think it's a mindset where you question everything, not in a in a
Mm.
nagging, annoying way, but in a way where you just come up with ideas. I mean, they always say like thinking outside of the box or something like that. Um, that to me is a creative uh, impulse also, that you would look at things differently. I also think. So, for example, I'll give you my example on the technical side because I'm not at all a technical person. In fact, before I started CG, I had never touched a computer. nothing, and I'm very bad at math and stuff. But little by little, I I I learn on the job bits of scripting, like simple programming. And where my creativity came into that is that if you showed me, like, a very simple programming construct, then I would take that and take it to many different directions that nobody would probably even have thought of. Like, give me this much knowledge and I'll try to do this much with it. And I think for everybody, that should be the spirit. Like, certainly do not wait for somebody to spoon feed you. Okay, this is how you do this. This is how you do this thing. I think everybody, in whatever they do, can take these little nuggets of knowledge and say, "Oh, now I know this. Well, maybe I can do this other thing with it, or perhaps I can twist it to do." And this applies obviously to any area.
Yeah.
So,
What you're saying is you first need to have a mindset of curiosity,
curiosity is a good
uh,
one. Yeah, exploration and curiosity. You're right. You're right.
right? Because that's what you say. And then post that, it's also about being so persistent in having in building a perspective.
Hmm.
And in that journey, you'll probably lead yourself into different spaces, but your perspective becomes better and better and better. Did I get that right?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
One of the things you talked about when you were describing who you are was also about studying in France and moving to the US and then now in India. I feel, for me at least, my personal journey, Philip, when I
Mhm.
was here in Bangalore versus when I first went to the US, it changed me as a person because suddenly I've got a bigger perspective of what's happening outside the world, what's culture differences, a whole set of things, like they just come gushing on your face, kind of a thing. And that adds to this whole perspective building and curiosity because I feel like you're then, it's like the individual interlocks that happen, right?
Yeah,
Because of your personal experiences. And
correct.
that adds to the creativity as well because your ability to ask questions, to how you were phrasing it earlier, becomes more and more clear and crisp. And
Mhm.
probably you'll experiment there again, but then it's like an amalgamation of your experiences. It's giving you that perspective. Has that been a important aspect of your journey? Yeah.
Oh, definitely. So big, I don't even know how to talk about it. I mean, to me, I mean, you said curious. That is something that that has always been there for me, but in a way, it expresses itself in my own ways. And particularly, I do like to explore, and whatever that really means. And it can be. I mean, for me, it's as simple as just walking in all the streets and getting lost in whatever city I'm in. I mean, I used to do that in Paris. I loved nature in California, and just literally losing myself. Sometimes a little scary, actually, in the wilderness. And here in India, it's been a life changing experience of really going everywhere. And whether you realize it or not, it absolutely does change the way you see the world. Um, so yeah, that experience. And there's no right or wrong. I mean, some people will not want to do that, others will. And I to me, there's a thousand journeys, right? They
Yeah.
probably all lead to the same ocean or something. But yeah, I think it feels to me that everybody should at least try to understand and fulfill what it is that for them works in making them fulfilled, I guess.
I think one of the things I think I read this and I sort of could correlate with it was, you know, we talk about diversity at workplace, but this was an interesting article or a research I read about diversifying your mindset.
Hmm.
And in this particular case, when you are going through this explorative journey, and this could be you just exploring your town itself
Mm.
or going and meeting different people, or like you said, you run, right? Or any of those other activities that you engage in and the kind of people you meet, or learning new languages, like Hindi, being in India now, and I don't,
Mhm.
right? All of those really then adds to that diversity in your mindset. And when you have a diverse mindset is when the curious part kicks in even more,
Mhm.
to ask those more open-ended questions without, to your point, being more like, I don't agree with you kind of a nag thing,
Mm.
to really actually, hey, I'm coming clean slate, I'm just trying to understand kind of thing. Has this been some, I mean, this has been my experience, um, every time I moved companies, different industries, and or job profiles, it diversified my mindset itself,
Mhm.
and that really helped in this journey. How has it been for you? Has that had a huge impact? Because you've also worked in different countries as well,
Right.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll say a few things that maybe are unrelated and going several directions. But first you mentioned, how your personal experiences and stuff they diversify you, and I think in a way, the implication is that brings richness to your work or the way you approach or your relationship with teams and stuff on my end. But this is just who I am, and of course it only applies to me. But um, I very, very much segregate the personal and the work. And you mentioned running, for example, and I've always had some sort of activity that was extremely important to me, but also very, very private.
Mm.
And for example, and running, to name one of those activities, literally has changed my life. Like, uh, I don't even know where to start, but I mean, we can spend the whole hour and a half we're talking about that. But you know, it's I'll say at least this one, it has allowed me to discover the world in a way that's very personal. And I don't think would I would have found the equivalent. I'm actually very. It's kind of funny, but the way you move around in the world to me totally affects the way you see the world. So you know, of course, if you're just driving around, you see certain things. If you're on a bike, not a bike, where you actually pedal, you see
Yeah.
other things. I've done a lot of that too. Running is one thing, and even walking is different. You'll see different things if you're walking around from running. So um, when I came to India, it's kind of funny. So I came from California. In California, I became this health nut, like everybody over there, and mostly I was cycling very long distances, and it was wonderful. It's things that I deeply, stayed with me. Um, but then when I decided to come to India, I was like, well, I'm not sure I'll be able to cycle, so I switched back to running, and I thought, well, I'll try to run in India, in Bangalore. And to be honest with you, at the beginning, I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. Like, would I be able to run in India? And there was all these stray dogs. Naigulu, you say in Canada, no? All the dogs, and I was like, shit, I'm gonna be eaten alive. And I was in my bed, like listening to all this barking at night, and tomorrow is the day where I get eaten. I was terrified, and
Yeah.
somehow I still went for it. And I'm not a courageous person, but somehow, and relatively quickly, I found that the dogs were just about fine. They were actually quite adorable, and little by little, and in the beginning, this is a little funny, but someone had told me, the dogs, people throw rocks at them, so just carry a rock. So I was running with my rocks, in my hands, and if a
So,
dog came, I never threw the rock, and I little by little I realized, well, all you need to do is to pretend to pick up a rock, and the dog goes away. And then later I realized that the rock is absolutely not necessary. You just behave a certain way, and the dog understands, and it's all fine.
yeah.
Um, but so I'm going a little bit. You can bring me back into the conversation at any point.
No, I'm liking
What,
this.
what it did though, it was completely unplanned, but in Bangalore, we were in Whitefield, and especially at that time, I think it's changed a little bit, but it was the countryside. Like very quickly, you were out in the fields and stuff, the villages, and little by little, I got a little bit bolder, and instead of being scared, I realized the the people were just so nice. Whether it was the children, the villagers. I mean, India,
Yeah.
the way the hospitality is, the way you can go to anybody's house. They'll offer you water, they'll offer you food. If you want to sleep, they'll go sleep outside so you can have their bed. I mean, I really, really got caught into that. Uh, that all became possible because I ran there. Had I been in a car, taking pictures, I mean, it would not have worked that way. And I also think it's the fact that I was by myself, sort of putting myself out there, like, in a way, you're a little bit vulnerable, and so I don't know, maybe that made me more relatable. Like, what is this poor guy doing? Sometimes, like, auto
Yeah.
rickshaws, they would say, "You look like you're not doing well. I'll
I'll
take
drop
you
you.
back. I'm not asking for money. I'll just take you back. You're about to faint or something." So, um, where am I going with this? So, yeah, it was a way to explore that I think became really really unique, and yeah, continues to this day. Now in Mumbai. Now, probably back to your question, like, did I take some of that back to work, or did it change the way I worked?
Yeah.
In a way, I don't think so, but it did.
It did. It didn't.
No, it did. It did. I think. Um, so part of it, as you mentioned, I had been learning Hindi, and I think there's a lot of things that I quickly, at least on my end, related to people here. They say, by the way, it's kind of funny, but they say that French people, they come to India and they lose their mind. It's exactly what happened to me. I pagal ho gaya, I just um, really took on. I just got so passionate, and I think some people saw it and understood it, and to them it sort of reciprocated. Like, if you present yourself a certain way, people usually will respond in the same way. So,
Yeah.
if you come to somebody, you smile, that person probably will smile too. If you're just like, I'm a whatever, then they'll do the same thing. So I do think to some extent it created a bond that I felt very much, and as I was saying earlier, um, here especially, always felt very involved in wanting people to to succeed, or to some extent our roles for people like myself coming from DreamWorks and stuff, from the big America, this and that. uh, it was that just our presence, even if we did nothing, I mean, we would be helpers in bringing opportunity to here, because with someone like me and others, I obviously was not by myself, but being there, it gave confidence that the work could be done here. So we ended up being the people who try to provide opportunity to people, and that, to me, I just got very involved in that, and very satisfied with that whenever that worked.
I think you're also in a very influential stage to sort of change the way the world looks at India. I think, um, the whole notion of Apu and elephants on the road.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done there, with more people traveling, more people experiencing India, especially the creative side.
Mm.
How you represent the country is also like, it'll really help to change
India,
that
sorry to
perspective.
interrupt you, but it just comes to my mind so strongly. India is a creatives person paradise. In fact, we flew several production designers here, and there's just so much, especially to Westerner, like, and they just didn't know where to look after a while, and sort of sketching everything, and I don't think anybody could be indifferent coming here. I just don't think that's possible. They may hate it, by the way,
Yeah.
but at least they won't be indifferent. You'll
Yeah.
have, and sometimes you'll love it and hate it at the same time, or whatever it is. But it is just such a rich experience. So for
Yeah.
people who that's what they do, they take on emotions and they translate them back some way or other. Then this is a very fertile ground.
Yeah, I agree. So I want to switch a little bit of the context now to the art of movie making, because we sort of pondered through an individual's journey and how does one hone the creativity. Um, when we were talking the other day, you talked about movie making and you spoke about it even in the beginning, which is a very complex process. And I assumed till I started talking to you that you have the freedom to create and express things at every individual level, but it's so complex that then it starts becoming governed
Correct.
in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
If you can run through, um, for my audience, what's like a movie making process, and where does it start, what are some big flows that happen before a movie really gets launched?
Yeah. Um, and I'll qualify that. I'm only talking about animation movie making. Live action might be different, although I'm sure there's similarities. But um, well, essentially, it starts with a story. So there will be a script, um, and pretty quickly we get into what's called storyboard. I apologize if everybody knows this, but essentially, we some people draw the whole movie. Um, and pretty quickly put that on film. So we will film each of these drawings and start putting a film together of whatever the duration is of usually about an hour and a half. And that process, which is essentially the story process, will continue to evolve sometimes almost until release, which is something that surprises people. But the story process, especially in big budget movies, is never really done, and because computers are seen are so powerful that you could always do anything. The studios reserve the right to make changes until almost the last minute. So that's one thing.
Mm,
So creatively, it's a little bit of a funnel because first you have this very open thing where somebody writes a script, we do storyboards. There will be a few key creatives who one will work on the look, for example. So what does this film look like? What is the visual language of the film? Uh, Maybe some other person, or maybe it's the same person, will design the characters. Of course, characters is one of the main things. I mean, they're your actors. There are the people who will draw you in the story. um, and then as these things come into focus and becomes more and more defined, the team grows. um, and as we move into production, so now we're starting to actually execute the film. There's all these different departments that come in and now address the different pieces. And our business has, or I should say, our methodology or workflow has become increasingly specialized.
mm,
um, in the old days, you could sort of dabble around, which is what I did. It's harder and harder to do that, although, as I said a little bit earlier, maybe it's coming back. But more and more, people specialize in any a particular aspect of the film, and the techniques and know-how has become so advanced that it's almost unavoidable. It would be just about impossible now to master the entire pipeline in one's head, just because all the parts are now so complicated and require full-time attention. um, so as an example, Uh, I mean, the basic ones, you'll have people animating. So animation, they take the characters who've been built, and they're set up for motion. So they animate. They make them move, speech, emote, and everything. Other people will light, so they'll place the lights. Um, and those are fairly obvious, but there's a lot of things that people might not think to. Some people are responsible for clothing. How does the clothing move?
yeah.
Some people are responsible for hair. How do you design the hair? How does it move? Like, I'm looking at you. You're nodding your head. Your hair is moving.
Yeah.
The computer doesn't know how to do that by itself. You actually have to, you know there's nothing, we get nothing for free. It's not like I can go and put this cup in my film. I have to model it, etc. I mean, there's a lot of steps. So you end up with about 200, 300 people working on the movie, and some of them have very broad responsibilities and a very broad area of influence. Some people have a very narrow, specialized area of influence. And it's not that one is right, one is wrong. It's just different things. And people, it's actually great because people can choose what is it that they like. Some people may want to be the experts in muscle deformations, and that's all they'll do, and they can become a wonderful experts on that. Um, so so yeah, on the purely creative front, I see it as a funnel, so to speak. Like early on, anything goes. Like the story process, somebody told me recently, being in the story is being wrong 70% of the time, meaning that you'll propose, you know 10 ideas, seven they'll end up in the dustbin.
Scrap.
If you
Mm.
get the three, you're actually lucky. And so you just keep trying into, oh, what about this, what about that? And early on, anything goes, and that's sort of very out of the box. And also speed, which is
Mm.
very important to uh, you know creativity, I would think. The speed of execution, where you can prototype 10 different ideas very quickly, is very important. As you move down the schedule and down the production process, that actually becomes less and less, to the point where I wouldn't say it becomes your enemy, but almost. Because now that you have 300 people working on the film, and these films are very, very, I mean, the good ones, or very controlled. Like you really want to put on screen the vision of the director, the production designer, and stuff, and you don't want this to go in all directions where it's a mess. And 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 so a lot is done to make sure that you're very much in control of what those pixels, final pixels, look like. And so as we move down, the autonomy of the artist is going to become much less. In fact, sometimes it's more like, well, you need to do this, and I don't want to see that. That's all I want to see, and you'll be successful if you do exactly that. Now, given our theme, you might ask, well, that maybe sucks. Like, okay, so these poor people are at the end of the chain. Like, what do they do? Are they not creative? Are they just robots? Absolutely not. They may not have the ability to make these huge decisions that are going to influence the whole movie, but everybody within their realm of what they're responsible for, the creative thinking is crucial. And I know, because I work with these people, and I'm one of them
Yeah.
who sort of art directs them. And I always say, don't be a robot. You're an artist. I could be the best art director of the world in the world. If the person who I'm working with is not meeting halfway, it's gonna be, I guess we'll get there.
Joey.
We'll be very mediocre. It won't be satisfying. We won't get, such a. So I really think, within your sandbox, within your area, there is always opportunity to take it to something that, where you're putting yourself into it, and and it's special but appropriate for the movie. And part of the creativity, by the way, is to understand, what does that mean, what is appropriate for the movie. And
I was going to ask you that. So,
well, so the movies, what they do is, we actually spend a lot of time defining what are all the rules of the movie. So you'll have, sometimes they call it like a bible, or a production design, you know
a blueprint.
yeah.
Sorts.
And if it's well done in this, um the rules are set, and as we progress, we keep updating that, and updating with material. We'll say, okay, this is our movie, and sometimes we'll show this other thing, this is not our movie. So that
Mm.
people all understand. And the after by the way, these schedules are pretty long, so it could be that people work on this for 2 years, or sometimes more than that if you include the development. So it doesn't get done quickly, much to the producer's frustration. But So people eventually, it's almost like they know exactly, like they know that this mic in this particular movie will need to be shaped a certain way, um, and stuff like that. So we do put a lot of effort into making sure that everybody can understand that, and once they understand it, they can run. And once they
Mm.
understand it and really digest it, so part of the creative process, perhaps for a lot of artists on these movies, is that there's a first thing of ingestion. Like, you are trying to be in the director's head and completely understand what it is that they want and what it is that makes them react a certain way. Once you have that, then it's almost like, okay, you're good. You go. You can do this. you know, and
Yeah.
and then you can sort of re-express, whatever creativity you have, but at least it's in that correct path, so to speak, that
Focused
it
in this.
will, yeah, it will work for the movie.
I'm trying to see if I can draw an analogy, and I think this is pretty much what happens in. I can speak for a product company. So you envision a product and a strategy, who's your target audience, which is like the script that you're talking about. And so it's a funnel that grows. But as you start coming to an individual in the organization or in the product chain, it's about how can you bring your piece of your skill and your creativity in that space.
Hmm,
Sometimes it could be process, sometimes it could be product and features and how we use it. Sometimes it is your business model itself as a strategy. Sometimes it is marketing strategy. There are the different ways in which you can impact that big picture based on the role that you're playing. And but it's important to what you're saying is it's important to first understand that big picture,
right.
ask a lot of clarifying questions of have I got that right,
Hmm,
and then quickly see how, to your point, it is a long process and
hmm.
it's heavy in cash and the cash flow required and investments. So very quickly you must thereby then come to zoom into your role and how can you make it better in your space, in your realm of work. Have I got that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember, for example, Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was our CEO, founder of DreamWorks, etc. Who had a very, very huge influence over the studio and everything. In the later stages of any movie, he often addressed the crew and said, we have, I don't know, 3 or 4 months to go on this. This is the time where you can make a difference. Like, whatever it is that you do, just do it with all your heart and know that it makes a difference. Like, all those little things that sometimes those contributions might seem insignificant to you, they're not. They actually
Hmm.
do make a difference,
Yeah.
to the general impact of the movie. And I thought that
Yeah.
that was very true. And of course, it fulfills two things. Like, the movie will probably get better, but also the people will get better. Of course, they want to contribute, and you know. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
I remember when you were talking about the dress, one of my friends who used to work in DreamWorks, I got curious and asked her, "What do you do?" So her job was like your dress that you're wearing based on the wind that flows.
Uh-huh.
How does it sort of move with the wind and the light, and how does that flow on the dress and the skin? I was like, really? That's it? That's your job? And she's like, don't belittle my job. That is a lot of work
Yeah,
because you have to factor in multiple aspects of, different teams and what they are thinking into how you're designing this, and also the personality. How is this personality that I'm putting the dress on? What kind of
absolutely. Yeah.
movements does this person have? A whole lot of things. And
Yeah, and it might
she says it.
influence you in your life in funny ways. Like, you might start looking at people and start looking at their clothes, and they wonder, "Kya kyun kurta hai wo?" But it's just that you're studying these things, and then, sometimes very simple things like the smoke on the coffee, like how does that behave, and you, I mean, back to the artistic slash creative thing, observation is huge. You might find beauty or interest in just about anything, and
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's just it's there. I mean, but perhaps it's not for everybody. But maybe when people are starting on this journey, we could, like, you don't need to go to the Grand Canyon to admire nature, for example, or there's just so much to take in, and perhaps it's actually much nicer if you find your own, and it's almost like it belongs to you. Like, I found this stupid tree in my, and but I loved it, and it's mine. Like, there's not 100 tourists around it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I like how we go, and I'm serious. I love these deviations you're taking because it brings the true aspects. Because creativity, I think, is not like engineering. A plus B equals C. It's the devil is in these observations and these details and understanding these nuances. And I think it's important thereby to sort of wander and come back. I have a question here, Philippe. So far, we've talked about an individual, but when you talk about movie making, it's also about not just you being creative, but having the ability to work across teams that are creative and probably not so creative, even,
Mhm.
right? Um, how does that work? Like, because that means that you should know how A of what you're doing affects B of something that someone else is doing. It needs that kind of humility, empathy, and a level of willingness to have open communication, a whole bunch of things. And yet we don't know if the other person is as creative as I am, and whether what I do can completely get tanked because of the lack or the better capabilities there. So help me understand, how does that work? How do you sort of maintain a balance? Is there an individual creativity and a team creativity? Is that different?
Yeah, I think it is. And to answer your question very straight, uh, it works with great pain. I mean, or it can. It's a difficult process. It's true, and we all talk about globalization and stuff. It can also be made more difficult by the fact that we're not meeting person to person, or on different time zones and stuff. Um, but actually, that's part of the journey, and some of my best memories and collaborations at work in a way have been where through the process of the filmmaking, you discover that relationship with one of your peers, one of your key partners, and it may not start easy, but eventually you almost become one. Like, so I'll actually will venture into giving you an example. I worked on the Madagascar films. And so in my job, so usually my job was what's called a visual effects supervisor. So you're kind of responsible for it's almost like creative meets technical meets budget. So you're trying to bring all this together and essentially deliver the movie. And it's so vast that different people will approach it in different ways or focus on different things. Um, that role is usually very closely partnered with the production designer. The production designer is more on the pure artistic side, trying to define the vision of the film. So, and that person might make paintings to, so on the Madagascar movies, what was really interesting is we we were we were trying to do something completely new at the time, because so we came off of Shrek, and Shrek had been hugely successful, and for the studio, they might have thought, well, okay, Shrek worked. Let's just keep doing Shreks. I mean, every movie could have looked like Shrek. On
Yeah.
Madagascar, and luckily the studio was on board. We said, okay, well, we have success with this, but let's try something different. And the idea was to make something much more cartoony, much less realistic, and very edgy, actually, for the time, especially. Um, but that was not easy, and trying to convey. I'm starting to digress again in my mind, but trying to take that vision that mostly is on someone's head and sometimes on paper, but execute it in the CG world, and also you got the studio. I mean, there's a lot of people involved in a way. Yet you want to retain what it is that is so special about that vision, It's actually very hard. You know, when this is a problem we have, but when you're on paper, you can do anything, right? So I can draw. I can very, it doesn't matter whether it's realistic or not. It doesn't matter whether it makes sense. It has an energy. It has a spontaneity.
Yeah.
So, for example, the Madagascar characters, if you look at the original designs, like the guy who drew that, somebody by the name of Craig Kelman, when he draws, he's like this, like shit, 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 and in a few strokes of the pen, he'll just get so much. So now let's take this, but now we're trying to reproduce it in 3D, where it's going to take probably, honestly, 3 or 4 months to realize that same character. 3 or 4 months, I'm not an exaggeration. It's
Wow.
very easy to lose that vision along the way.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
on that particular film, the production designer, Kendall Cronkite, um, very, very, very strong and very committed. And, she's someone who really believed in that vision and wanted to preserve it and make it all the way intact into the final pictures without it sort of diluting, which sort of naturally happens. And in my place as a VFX supervisor, my my whole thing was to understand what that was, understand her mind, and find a way by which the two of us could, you know, sort of huddle together to make all that happen. Um, so why am I saying all this? I think getting the key creatives and people to really work seamlessly in the creative field, I do think is difficult,
Yeah.
and which is one reason why once it works, I can tell you the studios will do all they can to keep that team working together. They will do absolutely all they can, because once you do have that bonding and people can understand themselves without worlds and all the little conflicts are done, uh, you know they it's a winning team that you do not want to uh, pull apart.
Disturb.
um,
Yeah.
Now, of course, I don't want to portray like this is hell, and it's part of the process. It's actually a good thing. Like in the beginning, maybe people will have, because the especially in the art world, there's no right or wrong. I mean, a lot of it is very subjective, and a lot of, and because you're not an artist working in isolation, you actually have to convince and explain your vision. So, fortunately or unfortunately, communication is a big part of it. You can't just say, "Oh, it's in my head," then okay,
Yeah.
go do it, but you're going to have to go do it by yourself. Now you need to bring people into that, and not only explain but also convince that they should feel it almost as the same way you do, that this
Yeah.
is the right, this is um so yeah, getting that whole team together and a good collaboration takes time, but once it does, it's magical. It's wonderful. Like the people will really click together, and the crew, everybody's going to feel it once they have that clarity of vision, and they all go like one person, all in the same direction, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, I can again. So I worked in a company for 15 years. I think that was the largest stint I did anywhere,
Mhm.
other than my marriage, I guess. But the reason it clicked, Philippe, was exactly what you said, right? Initially, the first year, I think we were each one very capable, very, we knew what we are, and we were put together. And so there was like it's like, oh, I'm saying this, you're saying this kind of a thing. But at some point, I think when the leader brings in this bigger picture and we're all aligned, oh, the beauty of actually working in a team that is so in sync with each other and brings their own strengths and capabilities. Every water cooler conversation is interesting because you
Right.
then talk about, oh, I thought of this last night. Should we just try it tonight? And it's like we are building capabilities like, trying, testing, going and showing it, rejected, come back. Oh, he didn't like it. Pasand nahi aaya.
Mhm.
Kyun nahi pasand aaya? And then you're going back again to try something else. I think it's beautiful to work in a space like that, but it is very difficult to get into a space like that.
Exactly.
And it requires the right kind of environment, the right kind of people in your team, and a great leader who can sort of,
Absolutely.
constantly mixing them together as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which sort of takes me to another segue, which is there something like what should a space be like to sort of build creativity, to build some kind of a culture as this? What would the ideal mix of things be to create something like that?
That's a very good question. It's also I think we're in a little bit of a mess at the moment. You probably heard of this thing called a pandemic. The things have changed. I don't think we've digested it fully. Um, it seems to me like if I haven't thought of this, by the way, so you'll have to watch me think a little bit. But when to me, when we were most successful, and I was lucky enough that it happened at several points in my life. By the way, it's not like it happened once and okay, gone. I'll never see this again. No, um, but I in a strange way, I feel that a little bit of ignorance is bliss, actually,
I love it.
or rather, um, I think there should be a balance of experience and not experience. Are those English words? But like I earlier I was saying how we did ants and the way we had no clue and probably people might start thinking, oh well, that must have been horrible. No, it was wonderful. Um, and I also feel that when we started the studio in Bangalore, uh, the artists here were very qualified, but they had not worked on those types of projects. The work that they had been doing was quite different, mostly higher quota, higher productivity, and a little less time to do the creative. Um, they had so much capacity, but they had not been given the chance to exercise that, and suddenly the door was open. Um, I I think in a team to foster the creativity. I'm thinking as I speak.
Yeah.
It really is important or helps to have the diversity of experiences where I mean you need a few senior people. Mostly saying this because otherwise I'll be out of business. But uh, uh, no, you need some. I mean, it's great to benefit from people who have seen things, and but that should be balanced with people who haven't, and in some ways by ignorance are very much willing to try things and may have ideas that just take you into some other direction, but that might be wonderful. And of course, there's the juvenile enthusiasm of I'm doing this for the first time, and it's like a puppy. Uh,
Yeah.
it's wonderful to have that. So I would say one condition to me would be to have a fairly broad diversity of people, and then the environment itself. I'm not sure. I mean, honestly, I'm not a fun guy very much. Like I don't do very much, party events and all that. And not that it's not important, but um, when I work, I think I take pleasure and fun in the work itself, but I don't do as much outside of work. That's just me. Of course, a lot of people, especially these days, they 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 look to work for more than just work. They might look at it almost like as a family. Personally, I believe sometimes that's taken actually a little bit too far, but that also needs to exist. And we we do want to take. It's actually really tricky because so our films take whatever, like 2 years, let's say, or year and a half of production. So of course there's a productivity question, of course, and there's a lot of money involved, right? So obviously there's going to be it's very easy when when you're working on such a long schedule to get thrown off schedule. So we have all kinds of people and processes that make sure you're on target. So if that's necessary, but if it takes over, then you start to squeeze the creativity um, out of it. So I think the magic formula, and I don't think there's an objective way to necessarily gain that, is where you have that productivity and things need to be organized. When things are not organized, it's very demoralizing for everybody, actually. So you need a very strong organization, but you also need that sort of those bubbles of freedom where people feel that they can actually either propose things or sometimes actually just get off work and do some other works either on the side or at specific times or throughout their career, that they get these opportunities to keep those things going. Studios, of course, it requires money and good, but some studios, for example, favor short programs where employees might go pitch their short ideas, and some are retained and actually put into production. Or there's all kinds of other creative activities that can continue to be that kind of environment, almost like a school. Like I always feel, by the way, and I wasn't, again, in my days, those schools didn't exist, but I hope students realize that the freedom they have in school is something, sadly, they'll probably never enjoy to that level again, and that they should really, really take advantage of it. And sometimes I'm a little
Yeah.
disappointed to see that students, well, okay, I'm a student, and they're this is the time where if they want to make a film, they can just do it, and rarely would they have this sort of complete, here's a blank page, do kind of whatever you
Yeah.
want, and man, take advantage of that. So yeah.
So in my experience working in product companies, and I also did one stint of setting up an agency, advertising agency business, that really opened up the perspective of how creativity and data is sort of coming together to really, you know completely changed the way advertising is done itself, and this whole hyper personalization. See, I'm digressing, but I'm going to come back.
Mm,
I've seen in this process that we go from a depth to a breadth model. We go as an organization from a horizontal to a vertical, and a hybrid model. In your experience, what's been the right balance? Do you start depth and then go breadth, or do you go breadth? Because for me, I feel, having done all of that and then sales, I would have loved to go breadth first and then go depth.
yeah.
um, that would be more powerful in the kind of personality that I am, because I once I've got the big picture, then I get very curious to understand how it's done and how it applies elsewhere. But what's your take on that, Philip?
That would be my instinct as well, to say, and it goes back to what we were saying about students, they should enjoy their time. That it seems to me would be useful to anybody to at least initially gain a very broad vision of the whole process, and that doesn't mean that you need to master it all into all its details, but at least have that vision and know-how over the whole process. uh, but at the same time, it's a bit also of a personal preference. Although I would warn, like I have definitely seen several examples of people who were in the depth, like they're very specialized into something, and then at some point, well, they think, well, now I'd like to move on. I'd like to be responsible for
Yeah.
more, and then they're a little bit held back because whatever they know is just so specific that acquiring knowledge in these other things that would be required to become like a VFX supervisor or a production designers, it becomes then harder and harder to get. um, but at the same time, there's no there's no right answer, in the sense that for example, people who do animation, so those who make the characters emote and stuff, that is often a specialization that you know is a lifetime endeavor, and
Hmm.
it's a perfectly valid choice to say, okay, this is what I do. In a way, if you draw the analogy with live action, an actor is an actor and they act. An actor does not need necessarily to know where the lights are placed and how the sound recording works. All he focuses on is in acting. So, and that's valid also. So, yeah, I don't have a very firm answer, but I and throughout my long career, I've seen a lot of everything. There's some people who are very much into it. I've seen people who are very successful at do this for a few years, do this other thing for a few years, and hopping in between things and being amazingly successful at all of them. But that's not for everybody. Some people might
Yeah.
have that desire and ability, others may not, and it's all okay. So yeah. But still, in the early years, it would be nice to go back, and especially now that technology is more and more enabling, I think it would be nice for people to, like, even an animator, and there are definitely a lot of animators like that. It is enriching for them to have a point of view how things look in the end, uh, because sometimes it really affects the way their performance is perceived. And I've known animators who would come to the lighters and say, for example, the highlight in the eye is not where I thought it would be, and it sort of changes my character's expression.
Mm.
I like the fact that they. Sometimes that's a pain, actually, but it's good that they think that way. Though it's great that, and or in the same way that an actor is aware of where the lights are and will hit his mark a certain way. So should an animator. They should also think about lighting and stuff. And I think those who do, and many do, um, it gives you a more well-rounded creative approach, and it also gives you a more well-rounded way to collaborate with others because you're more aware of what your friend doing this other thing might be facing, and there's a little bit more empathy between the various specialties. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think it also then what you're also saying is in this process you sort of evolve or grow to understand where my interest lies as
Mm,
well, right? Because as you're sort of understanding how your work impacts someone else or how their work impacts you by knowing the whole gamut of things, you'll also see where your interests are. Like for me, that was a
yeah,
big indicator
absolutely.
to
Yeah,
go and experiment on some other things, right? Um, I think that is also very important to keep an open mind from that
absolutely.
point
Yeah,
of view.
yeah. To me, I mean, and again, this is probably a personal thing. Like, I'm not saying everybody should do
Yeah,
this, but leaving
yeah,
leaving yourself open to discoveries is something that I find cool and enriching. But yeah, everybody does it their own way.
yeah, yeah. I had a follow up on this. I think I when we were talking the other day, I talked to you about. I was reading about Shrek, and they had an initial design, and the character Shrek was like really one very crude sort of person, and then from there to the Shrek that has evolved, there's a huge, massive change. Uh, and going by what we just talked now, I'm sort of putting my thoughts together based on our conversation now. We spoke about how, making an animated movie is not a small process, it's a large team spread over years, and, with perfection coming in from different nooks and corners to make that a success. So, my question then to you is creativity something that can be scaled?
Interesting. What in what sense you mean that the creativity would apply to an entire team or over a long period of time, or
Yeah, like not just a team, but beyond that. Like if I'm just the artist who's responsible for how the clothes flow versus I have Vishnu here who's responsible for,
Mhm.
how my expressions are. He's for lighting, and then there's motion happening. There's another, in the case of there's Madagascar, there's a donkey coming and different characters coming. You're talking about different teams coming
Ah,
together
right, right,
and
right.
each one sort of having their creative best and coming and delivering something at scale,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like a movie which is like at least 2 hours long. um,
Okay, yeah, yeah,
across
yeah, yeah,
200, 300 people. And I'm trying to see if I draw a parallel to an organization. It's a similar story, isn't
yeah.
it? We're trying to build products. We're trying to, and in my experience, I've seen most companies, you have about 10% people who are sort of looked up as innovators, who are very curious, the weirdos sort of people, and they know each other. We know each other because we know, "Oh, there's another weirdo like me." I make my time to go meet that person, talk to them, understand. But to drive something like that at scale,
Yeah, yeah.
even to,
Right.
let's say, 50% of an organization, is a different ball game itself.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see, is it even possible?
Like, I mean, in the way I take the question, I see two aspects. So one is the finished product. So,
Yeah.
can you make something that is still considered very creative, but you have 300 people working on it? Or, is something that is truly creative, needs to be done by a very limited number of individuals. Um, and I'll use examples from what I know, but unfortunately I don't think it's going to resonate with most people. But because in my youth I was very passionate about music, but classical music, and so when you look about Beethoven, which is one of the biggest composers, you can see that all his works were great, but where he was the most out there, so to speak, like where really he innovated to a depth that is still fascinating today, is in his piano works.
Mm,
And while his symphonies are great, they may not take it as far as the piano works. And in my mind, that's because a pianist is by himself, and there's just a freedom that you don't need to orchestrate literally 100 musicians playing together. The pianist is by himself, and therefore, so in terms of pure innovation, there's an agility that you have at a smaller scale that is not as easy to get on a much bigger scale. There's another factor, of course, which is money. The more money involved, the more people are going to freak out about what you're doing, and then you're going to get more scrutinized. These days, by the way, we're seeing it happen where there's a lot of very revolutionary films, sometimes short, that are coming out of virtually unknown studios, and or even the student work. Like some of the best schools in the world are turning out movies where for us who are the professionals, and sometimes we go, oh wow, where did that come from? Like, um, so your instinct would be to say, if you're really trying to push the look and stuff, you need more freedom, and you probably need fewer people.
mm,
Now the flips, or the other side of that, though, is you can still um push your creativity on some of those big films, but perhaps it's not as easy or avant-garde. But and going back to Beethoven, his symphonies are equally great. Maybe they're not as out there, but and definitely at some of those, like a Pixar, DreamWorks, or some of those leading studios. um we were able, I think, to push. uh it's almost like there's a vision, and you don't want to lose it along the way, and you want to keep whatever the power of that vision is intact. And you know I think to some extent it worked. On some of the movies, not always, and some movies might be more commercial than others, but yeah, you can still hang on to that. And it's like we were talking earlier, like bring all those 200 artists into that same plan where they're all converging to that thing, and still deliver that.
so what you're also saying then is there are two aspects, right? Being lean and agile is good, but being lean and agile while sort of having a shared vision, a common vision, and sort of having checks and balances to ensure we're not deviating from that. As long as we maintain a balance around that, then it's quite possible to look at creativity at scale. Maybe not at 100% scale,
Yeah.
but there are zones in which we can function at scale
Yeah,
as
and
well.
there's trade-offs, and I'm sure this applies to all other industries, but, if you're lean and agile, you can do whatever you want and great, but your
Mm,
scope is gonna be limited at some point. I mean, you're
right.
not gonna be able, no one at this point in time could make, I don't know, Coco, for example, by himself. You do
Mm,
need the 200 people. Maybe someday the technology will be such that someone can do that, but that's not the case at the moment. So, either you're doing shorter formats, and even then there is still a team. I mean, it's not like the problem goes completely away. um, if you want to have things that are just more ambition in scope, then you do need the team, and you need a I think it's both a creative excellence but also perseverance. Like, believe me, the people, the directors, production designers, um these are people who are quite stubborn, actually. They I mean, the good ones, they and
yeah.
and you want them that way. Like, sometimes it might be a pain, actually, to work with them, to in some ways, but you actually do want that. I prefer that to the very nice guy who doesn't have a vision.
Yeah.
um and I've definitely seen some people who just viscerally, they this is what they want to get on the screen, and they'll fight.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, as long as you have that, and hopefully the studio supports it, and DreamWorks did, and I'm sure, I've not worked at Pixar, but I know Pixar would as well. Um, then that can still happen, but it's true, at the same time. Yeah, it's not always easy.
Yeah. I'm reminded of this very early on in my career, Philip. We had one architect. So an architect is similar to
Yeah, it would be the
these
same.
the
Yeah,
persona that you just described,
yeah.
right? So he was very clear on what he was trying to pull together, and we were like these young, just out of college students, or just learning, entry level experienced engineers, and we'd go to him with a lot of questions, and he would just look at us, like he'd put his glasses like this and look at us and say, "Did you RTFM?" And so initially I never understood. Only later I understood RTFM is read the fucking manual before you come to me. Oh, don't expect me to spoon feed you. Read the fucking manual. Come back when you have a point of view. I am willing to debate with you on a perspective and talk to you. But don't come to me for, oh, you know, I'm starting here and I'm just thinking, and don't do lazy shit with me,
That's
kind of
funny.
thing.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point, you need to work with people like these to really see that perseverance, right?
Mm,
It's about pushing back and being stern around it, and just for the fact that you want it better and better,
mm,
right? I think it's important to have some of these people.
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, so I have two of my, questions. I told you that I normally insert in attitude makeover. Um, the first one is, I've had several takeaways from this conversation. And what are your takeaways? What are some of your key takeaways from this last 1.5 hours? I think we've spoken. Like
Well,
takeaways.
my takeaway is, I hope this is interesting to people, and I don't know, really, but, I feel like in some ways, we're getting into a little bit the specifics of, what I've been involved with, and of course that's what I'm going to talk about, because that's what I know. And I hope, for people who are in a completely different context, that it still means something to them, and that they can draw those parallels, because I don't think we did a very good job at drawing it for them, and maybe I wouldn't know how to do that anyway. But, um, when whenever we talk, obviously we're talking about creativity, and we're talking mostly about the artistic field, but, um, clearly it applies to everybody. And, as I said before, in our companies, there's a lot of people of different backgrounds that contribute to the films, and the creativity is not it need not be artistic. In fact, coding or procedures and stuff, those are very, very creative fields as well. Like, essentially, I think maybe creativity is a bit of a word that's kind of it makes you look very snobbish and stuff, which I don't want to be that person actually. Maybe it's more about invention and how what you bring into your work. So I hope that would be the takeaway, that okay, they've been talking for an hour and a half, but this is what it does for me, and in the way I do my own thing, even though it's what I do might be different from what they do. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
we'll,
yeah. I
we'll
think
know we'll know once people have feedback and say, oh no, this was boring like hell or not. I don't know. Yeah, you
No,
tell me.
I think it was for me. Here's my thinking. When I started Attitude Makeover, Philippe, I've always had people who've guided me, who've mentored me, who've just been themselves, and as a result of that, I have sort of seen these nuances of how do they handle these situations, what are their perspectives on these, and thereby sort of gone back to look at how do I evolve as a person. And my intent of Attitude Makeover as a podcast channel was to actually have these kind of more meaningful, deeper conversations. We don't get into this kind of deeper, we sort of hover on the 40,000, 60,000 feet above conversations. So the idea is, through this, can you draw a lateral thing to, oh, how does it apply to me? That's very
Mm,
interesting. I didn't think of it this way. Can I change something that I'm doing? Because I was able to do that throughout my career
mm.
thanks to my mentors. And so the idea is, can this be a platform that enables people? Even if two of them are on board with it, I think it's
Yeah,
a good
true. Absolutely. Yeah.
journey to go through.
Yeah.
Um, so that was the thinking. And so thank you so much. My last question: what does attitude makeover mean to you? This is more for my branding exercise.
I don't know if I'm going to answer you in a way that you will help your brand, but I mean, I of course I'm thinking about myself. So um, I'm not that old, but I'm older, probably older than a lot of your target audience, and um, I'm actually at a stage of my life where, um, and maybe it was always true, but the I do want to rethink. What are the things that I do? What are the things that I enjoy doing? What are the things I can do or cannot do? And you know, I like what you're doing, because I think it really helps people question all those things, which I think is healthy at any point, um, in their career. Um, it's funny. I mean, as human beings, we have a tendency to complain, and often seen people in situations, and they were complaining, and then later they look back at that and thought, "Oh, this was the best time of my life," and stuff. And um, I think the complaint or can be productive to always have that thought process to think, what is it that I'm doing, and am I into the right thing that is fulfilling for me, or not. And I think it's healthy to question yourself and the people around you, as long as it doesn't become a nagging complaint, but that it is a more positive process that happens. um, One thing specific to our industry, and this would be almost like another episode of this, but I do think in India right now, in our industry, we're sort of getting over that hill of a lot of it so far was about execution, and the studios here would get very precise instructions about you're going to deliver this in this time frame, etc. And people have been working that way and gotten really good at that. When you open the door and say, okay, now you have a lot more time, a lot more freedom, and be creative, it doesn't happen overnight. In fact, one of my very classic be prepared if I'm ever going to interview you. One of my classic questions in when I interview someone is telling that person, okay, now you have 3 more weeks on this thing you're showing to me. What are you going to do?
Mm.
And I'm very surprised that most people actually don't know how to answer. They'll tell you, well, I'll make it better. Okay, well, okay, of course you're going to make it better. How are you going to make it better? Not it's
Yeah.
some people do wonderful responses, but and I think most of the reason is because they've not had to exercise that. And
Mm.
it's coming now, and it's a wonderful development, and we need to continue to push in that direction. And there too, I don't know if this is the case in other industries as well, but it's time to go, from the more like I'm just executing to now I am more a creator, a conceptor, or whatever it is that you do, and we're now taking this in our hands, and that would be actually to me the biggest attitude makeover, which hopefully is in progress, but I hope will continue to gain strength.
Yeah, I love the way you put it. I think my last guest was talking about there is no right answer to what's the right career path, but there's always a right journey, and
Hmm.
choosing the right journey is very important. And I love the way you put this as well. That it's important to exercise that side of you
Mm,
that has not been used to it,
mm.
and it's worth the plunge. It is important to take that plunge. And thank you so
Yeah,
much.
well, thank you.
Well, Philippe, thank you for this lovely conversation. I am pretty sure this is going to go well.
Yeah, yeah. I had
As
fun, so
we've gone.
let's see if other people may have fun. But yeah, for me, it was a great time. Thank you. I love your
Thank you so
questions, and I
much.
love the
Thank you.
exchange. So great.